Well, thank you, Merrill. I'm happy to say tonight for the first time, co-moderating questions following Johnathan's presentation will be Chris Chen. Chris, perhaps you would introduce yourself, please.
Sure. So I'm filling in for Ivy Kubica. I'm not as pretty or young as Ivy or knowledgeable. However, I was available, and apparently that trumps all those things. I worked at SDG&E in my last role for about 22 years. Currently serve on a number of nonprofit boards and some for-profit advisory boards. And for those of you, just to clarify, for these of you who do ask questions in the chat line, we'll be saving those till the end of the presentation before we present them to Johnathan.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Johnathan, a few weeks ago, NCCCA hosted a showing of the movie Common Ground, and Johnathan graciously was one of four panelists moderating. They were all absolutely wonderful. Johnathan agreed to join us tonight and to continue the discussion and hopefully deepen the dialogue that we started then about the urgent understanding and actions we need to take with respect to soil and food and health and so forth. Johnathan is the Director of Engagement and Impact for the Ecology Center and has worked for San Diego-based Wild Coast within the Marine Wildlife Conservation Program. He managed efforts focused on representing underserved community members, wonderful Johnathan, on the side of conservation within the Marine Life Protection Act. In 2011, Johnathan founded the One-to-One movement and served as executive director for more than 5 years, where he led programming that has reached over 30,000 students with high-impact project-based learning projects on waste diversion, water conservation, sustainable food. As of 2017, One-to-One merged with the Ecology Center, where Johnathan is now, again, the Director of Impact focused on growth, management, partnerships, and programming. We're thrilled to have you with us tonight, Johnathan. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, it was my pleasure to be at the Common Ground screening and serve with some excellent panelists, and similarly now my pleasure to be here with you. I work at the Ecology Center, which is in San Juan Capistrano, South Orange County, which I'll talk about in a bit, but I live in Oceanside, from San Diego, born and raised. I'm a first-generation immigrant to Southern California and very, very proud and committed to the well-being of our environment, our ecosystems, our biodiversity, especially in San Diego County, and grateful for the work that you all do to carry that torch. So thank you for having me. Thank you for the work that you do. I'm going to try to share my screen. I shared with our moderators here that I don't know how to use technology, so bear with me, but I think together we can figure it out.
That's good.
Okay, great. You guys can see my screen. Is that right?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to take it from the top, and if 2 hours in you're bored, feel free to cut me off. But my name is Johnathan Zaidman. As I mentioned, I was born and raised in San Diego. My parents are from Mexico City. My grandparents are from Eastern Europe. They're Holocaust survivors that weren't let into the United States. I think some people don't know that quotas here didn't start with one of the former presidents and a Muslim ban, but we've been doing this for generations past. So my family ended up in Mexico City and fortuitously came to Southern California, where I was raised. I've been working in conservation for over 21 years now. As Joe mentioned, I began at Wild Coast. If you're not familiar, I highly recommend you look into this San Diego-based organization. They're down in Imperial Beach, led by Serge Dedina, who was the mayor of Imperial Beach for many years. And they're doing some really critical work in binational coastal conservation. what I love about Wild Coast and various other organizations that take this same approach is the understanding and sophistication of the fact that conservation has no borders. So to understand that binational approaches to this work are just as critical as regional and community-based ones, I think is really critical and beneficial. There I worked at trying to engage community on a very complicated process called the Marine Life Protection Act, which was 20 years in the making of essentially the establishment of underwater state parks. So, we're 100 and some years into national parks, and we haven't really been doing that in the water for that long. And there are a great deal of many stakeholders in that process, from the Navy to indigenous communities to obviously recreational and commercial fishing interests. And conservation is a small sliver of that pie. And it was a challenging process, to say the least, to not just represent and speak for the Marine Life Protection Act, but to engage community members to go up for this highly bureaucratic, complicated political process. But fortunately for us all, not just Wild Coast, but Surfrider and Coastkeeper and Five Gyres and dozens of other organizations and tens of thousands of community members up and down the coast of California were able to speak up for this conservation and make really meaningful, what are called marine protected areas, MPAs. So underwater parks, in which we're now starting to see now 20 years of impact of what it looks like to say, this is a no-take zone. This is not a recreational zone. This is simply for habitat restoration. And we're seeing some amazing scientific results of habitat repopulation. Just kind of long story long here, going through the years of my professional career has been mostly in nonprofit management on the conservation side, from animal conservation to environmental. As Joe mentioned, I started a nonprofit early 2010, focused on creating a more inclusive and accessible narrative on the environment. My perception was that coming out of the 90s and being someone that was active in this movement, there was a lot of divisiveness and still remains to be the case, where we've politicized the environment and conservation unnecessarily and created it into a partisan issue. And our simple objective was to make the work more accessible and make it more universal and relevant, and do so through encouraging people to feel as if they can be a part of the solution instead of blaming them for being a part of the problem. I was a little tired of this, finger pointing in the environmental movement of telling people, well, you're wrong and I'm right. And if you're not doing, you're not riding your bike and you're not eating a vegan diet and you're not, buying thrift clothing, then you're certainly a part of the problem. So we as an organization over a 5-year period, we're mostly focused on children's activities and almost exclusively on hands-on experiential programs that allowed for kids to build a personal relationship with the subject matter. So quick example, one of the nationally recognized initiatives that we developed was called the Away Project, in which we would give each kid, we would go into a middle school classroom mostly, give each kid a reusable duffel bag that was made out of waste vinyl of billboards that were coming down off the side of the highway. And we'd ask them to carry their bag with them for the week and collect within it all of the waste that they generated that week that would have otherwise been thrown away. And then we'd come back at the end of the week and we would conduct an audit. And the idea there being a bit of just, the light bulb moment of realization that there is no away, everything goes somewhere. And then having some meaningful conversations around what's in your bag and why do you think that you have this versus that, and what could have been diverted or eliminated or reused or otherwise. So that was, a few years of focus, actually supported from SDG&E. So a lot of community support for that work. And then, as Joe mentioned, almost 10 years ago, I had the opportunity to take our small nonprofit and merge it with this other small nonprofit in Orange County, which for me was unheard of. San Diegans don't go to Orange County. And I was going to say vice versa, but if you've ever been on the 5 South coming from Orange County on a Saturday or Friday, you know that people from Orange County definitely come to San Diego. But we had the opportunity to merge our nonprofit with the Ecology Center, which at that point was 3/4 of an acre, doing a lot of the same and similar work, but with a different vernacular, and the rest is kind of history. So thank you for abiding this long intro of myself. But what I'd like to do is simultaneously focus on the subject matter and on our organization and focus, because I think the two stories tell one another pretty nicely. I mean, clearly we don't have the hours and hours and hours to get into the history of food systems, the challenges and opportunities. So I'll use us as an example as to how we're doing this work and what our focus is. Okay. So just 14,000 years to now or so, agriculture is and always has been the backbone of human civilization. It is the single source of nourishment for obviously us as humans, but really also simultaneously for our planet, our soil, our waterways, and our wildlife. Agriculture has been the central economic and cultural and nutritional driver for these tens of thousands of years. And for just about all of that time, agriculture has been powered by humans and animals. This was, and really still remains, one of the greatest sources of land-based literacy on this planet, intergenerationally and interculturally. I think we all still have that grandma or that neighbor that has a great relationship to an affinity with, this is what we used to grow. This is how we used to prepare this meal. These are the seeds that were precious and valuable to our culture, and various conversations in and around that, which is ultimately, our relationship to the land. I like to think and talk about food despite having a pretty broad environmental background, as I mentioned, from wildlife conservation all the way to waste diversion. Food to me is a really interesting topic because it is one of, if not the most universal, that touches every single person that we interact with. So, I don't need to take a show of hands here, but just by asking who here eats, I think we can do a bit of an informal study on how these issues really affect us, both for better and for worse. Fortunately, we still have a good deal of positive association with our relationship to food, our celebrations, our holidays, our in and around meals. So we're able to use this kind of linchpin of a conversation in order to have a broader and more holistic approach to, if you want to call it sustainability, or if you want to call it just human life, or life for on planet Earth, through the focal lens of food. So, thinking about the last really almost only 100 years or so, we've taken a complete 180. Whereas you take these 12,000 years of food being the source of nourishment, and unfortunately, we're at a time and place in which 99% of our foodways and food systems are just about the single source of disease for this planet. We're living in a time in which, through the industrialization of our food system, agriculture is the leading cause of climate emissions on the planet. We have decimated our waterways. We have destroyed wildlife populations. We have a time in which 2 in 3 men in their lifetime, myself included, will have cancer. 1 in 2 women. We have lost a significant amount of our global topsoil, which we know that humans can't survive without. So all of these are direct reflections on the last 125 years or so of agricultural industrialization. It's replacing humans and animals with chemicals and machinery. And with that, not just the environmental and the health effects, has also come a great loss of cultural connectivity. We're talking about what did it look like intergenerationally for us to have a relationship to the land, which was almost all exclusively based on agriculture. Now we have replaced this culture with a sense of convenience. not to blame anyone or any generation, but we had about a 40-year window where, from a food system standpoint, but really even from waste and single-use convenience culture standpoint, we didn't really focus on the cultural elements that had brought us forward for all these thousands and thousands of years. So, the family meal of a small Italian grandma and her family sitting around a table, shucking fava beans for 3 hours in order to make a meal, which itself was also 3 hours, which not just was the nutritional nucleus of that family, but also the social one as well. This is what kept people together. That's really kind of gone away and was replaced by things like microwave meals and fast food, and that loss of nourishment has coincided with the loss of culture. It's not totally gone. Many of us here gardeners and have that connection still, but by and large, our society doesn't have that as a singular focal point anymore. So just some not ideal stats you all can read yourselves. I think the story kind of speaks for itself. Pretty soon thereafter, you all heard of organic, of course, coming into the industrialization of the food system and really out of the wars and Great Depression. We had a lot of farmers raising their hands and saying, this doesn't feel right. Using petrochemicals in order to industrialize farms, the literal same things that we use to bomb people with, doesn't feel like the right direction. And then from that was born the organic food movement. And I always like to mention the fact that this is not a new concept. It's not a concept invented by white people at Whole Foods. This is indigenous agriculture. This is just how things used to be. But the movement of people, coming over from Europe and being born really kind of out of the Santa Cruz region in the United States of this organic food movement, where they were activists and they were people really essentially, if I can boil it down, saying maybe we shouldn't spray poison on our food and then feed it to our children. And that's been happening now for 70 years. And we've advanced that movement to the time and place in which we have organic food in Costco and Whole Foods and Walmart. And that's great. It's excellent to come out of the last 40 years of convenience culture that was really based on toxicity and move into something that's less poisonous. Obviously, good start. As I say here, in my opinion, and fortunately many others, organic is not the ceiling. It's not, the other way of saying it is, it's not the best we can do. It's probably the least we should do. But there's organic food right now that we're all buying every day that is grown by people making starvation wages in underserved populations, shipping them in plastic around the world. And I think all of us can agree that that's not the model for health, and it's certainly not the gold standard. So 15-ish years or so in the making to what that new gold standard could look like. And there's various parallel organizations and individuals and thought leaders that are pushing similar thoughts forward. And that's both good and also sometimes complicated. But one of those tracts is, as some of you might have heard of, is Regenerative Organic Certification. And this is governed by the Regenerative Organic Alliance. You've heard other words like biodynamic. We hear words like permaculture, and these are both oftentimes value systems as well as methodologies, and in some cases, actual certifications, so sets of standards. When we really, at the Ecology Center, which I'll talk about in a bit, believe in various of those methodologies and sometimes need to just kind of put yourself under one umbrella in order to make it more digestible for the community. So to talk a little bit about regenerative organic as a certification, this is the new high bar in agriculture. It's the new gold standard. Whereas organic really just means that we're not spraying poison on our food. Regenerative was meant to have a more holistic approach to health, not just for the food itself, but for the soil and the animals and the community. This is, as I mentioned, it's about 15 years of thought leadership in the making, really pioneered by funders at some brands that you might have heard of, like Patagonia and Dr. Bronner's, by thought leaders at organizations like the Rodale Institute, which coined the term organic, by literal thousands of farmers and climate scientists and medical professionals, as well as social justice advocates. So long run up into what the certification has become, and it's really only been released around 6 years ago. So what these folks tried to do is create a standard that is so comprehensive and so stringent, yet also accessible. You know, if we said, all right, this is the only path towards sustainable agriculture, yet nobody can do it, then of course it's not going to gain any traction. The 4 elements of regenerative organic certification are: 1, it has to be organic. So in our case, the Ecology Center, you know, we are both certified organic and certified regenerative organic. So you have these 2 parallel certifications. 2, you have to practice soil care. So some of you might have seen, you know, Joe hosted Common Ground, or maybe you saw Kiss the Ground a few years before that. There is a movement and an understanding that is both thousands of years old and also somehow a few years old, that our soil is our most valuable and precious resource. As I mentioned earlier, there's a great Wendell Berry quote that talks about how humans can't exist without the top 6 inches of topsoil on this planet. And yet, over the past 75 years of industrialized agriculture, we've essentially been doing all that we possibly can to destroy that topsoil. So in the regenerative organic movement, there's a set of standards that you need to meet in terms of how we care for our soil. Some of those are the crop rotation. And again, simple, indigenous, age-old philosophies and practices. So you're moving your crop every year, which in order to do that means that you need to have a diversified crop to begin with. If all you grow is strawberries, you can't rotate your strawberries because the only thing to replace the strawberries are the strawberries. So there's an element of crop diversification and then crop rotation. So every year your strawberries, if you call it, you have a 20-acre farm field and you're going to do 4 or 5 acre fields within that. Your strawberries are in field 1, and then they're in field 2, and then they're in field 3, and then they're in field 4, and then it's only 5 years later that they return to field 1. The benefits of crop rotation for those, and apologies if I'm over explaining any of this stuff, you're all well informed and up to date community, are we're not overworking our soil with the same crop year after year after year, which is extractive of the same nutrients and minerals year after year after year. I like to talk about agriculture like I talk about ecosystems, which is that just like every single ecosystem on planet Earth, health is built on diversity. So biodiversity, the term we've all heard before, is the basis for balance in an ecosystem. Without biodiversity, there is no balance. When we have a farm that only grows one thing, a monoculture, over and over and over again, there's no biodiversity, thus there's no balance, thus we need to replace whatever is missing on that farm synthetically. So in order to avoid that, one practice is rotating your crops. Another one that's very important for those who saw Common Ground is cover cropping. Cover cropping is planting something that is building biology back into your soil. So it's not planted for harvest, it's planted for value. Cover cropping is not particularly popular because now we're taking our 20-acre field with 5 acre paddocks, and now 1 or 2 or 3 of those are not in production, and we can't support the economic needs of the farm because this field is resting. But we have to find a creative way to implement the cover crop. So that's part of the crop rotation. So behind the strawberries come the cover crop, and then that's going to be there for the next season. And then the third that we implement, as well as various other methodologies, is an animal rotation. So you go your crop, after your crop comes your cover crop, after your cover crop comes, in our case, our chickens. So we're an urban farm in, 1 mile from the 5 and 1 mile from the ocean, and we're only 28 acres, so we don't have cows or goats or sheep, but we have chickens, and our chickens are following our cover crop, and they're doing the hard work of eating our pests and fertilizing our soil and using their little dinosaur feet to stomp it into the soil and make beautiful, healthy living soil. The third element of regenerative organic certification is animal welfare. We in organic agriculture, and certainly not to bash organic agriculture or anyone that consumes animal products, but we have stripped as I mentioned, the poisons, the toxins out of that food system. So organic eggs or beef don't have antibiotics or hormones, and the feed doesn't have pesticide, but there's no element of animal welfare in organic agriculture or in organic animal agriculture. So you can take a 2,000 square foot hen house and put 1 million chickens in it in rural Alabama and sell organic eggs at a premium coming out of that hen house. But as I just mentioned, in ecosystems, creating imbalance creates disease. Certainly 1 million chickens together and even within their surrounding ecosystem creates a great deal of imbalance. We shouldn't have that concentration of animal operation really anywhere. So what happens coming out of those spaces is now we've poisoned the animals that are living in that operation. We've poisoned the people that work within them. We've poisoned the environment around it, and we have poisoned the waterways that touch it. And by the way, as we know, water all flows into itself, and now we've poisoned all of our waterways because of it. So in regenerative organic certification, there are standards that we need to meet on animal practices and animal welfare. And then the fourth is this farm worker equity piece. And that again is something that's not addressed in organic. Of course, there are various different certifications, and sometimes brands on consumer packaged goods will hold multiple. So you might have a bagged product of something that is both certified organic and certified fair trade. And that particular product went through the trouble of being both. But in just organic certification, there's nothing that speaks at all about farm worker equity. The challenge for that is that being that a head of cabbage or an artichoke is typically not a packaged good, you almost never really have any additional certifications on produce as you might on consumer packaged goods. So if you were to step into Whole Foods right now and you'd pick up something from one of the center aisles, you might see all sorts of great certifications: certified organic, certified fair trade, 1% for the planet, whatever. But when you're buying produce, some of us just have kind of the visibility of seeing this is organic, this is conventional. So I would say the vast majority, if not just about all, of organic agriculture doesn't really particularly value this farm worker equity piece when it comes to living wages. So in our case at the Ecology Center, in order to get this certification of regenerative organic, we need to pay our farm workers a starting wage of $22 an hour. That's by MIT algorithm that's bioregionally allocated by zip code. And I don't know about you all, living in Southern California, $22 an hour doesn't get you very far, but it's certainly better than, I would say, the vast majority of farm workers in the state of California that are earning minimum wage. And that's probably 2 or 3x the average of what the vast majority of farm workers in the United States are earning, which in and of itself might be 10 to 20x what the vast majority of farm workers worldwide are earning. So for us in this work and in this movement, the piece of supporting these vital individuals who are the literal backbone of human existence through a living wage, through health benefits, through full-time year-round work, so they don't need to move from Carlsbad strawberry fields to Bakersfield baby carrots to Gilroy garlic back down, and thus aren't able to lay down roots and have their kids in school or otherwise. Also the challenge with seasonal farm work. There are many that we can go into, but one of them is that you're a contract laborer. So what happens when you get hurt? You're not able to work and you don't get paid. Farm work is hard work, so there's a lot of injuries. A lot of these individuals are undocumented Central American, so they're scared of going to institutions for support. So if you hurt yourself, instead of going to the urgent care or the doctor, you just start drinking on the job at 5 a.m. and all of a sudden you have this really broken social system of individuals who are hurt and suffering, who are addicted to alcohol or pain medication, who don't have any relationship to their geography because they're moving around seasonally and aren't making any money. And then we blame them for some of the challenges that insecurity and vulnerability creates. Obviously, something I'm very passionate about and can go deep on. So that's kind of the structure in where we've come from to hopefully where we're going. The Ecology Center was the first certified regenerative organic farm ever. This was in 2019 was the first year we got the certification. And then we host the annual Regenerative Organic Alliance gathering here at our farm. And just a few months ago, they were saying 5 years later, there's now 35 million acres of regenerative organic farmland worldwide. So the hope is that this movement takes hold quickly and powerfully and moves faster than the 75 years of getting to organic that we've been working on so far. To shift into the story of the Ecology Center, not because I like talking about myself, but more because I think we can use it as an example. I like to think of this as where we can go if we were to choose to. And that started for us in 2008 on this historic farmhouse on a dirt lot. Where we are, San Juan Capistrano, as I mentioned, I don't know if anyone on the call has been up here before, but I live in Oceanside and I drive here every day and I'm still here to tell about it. So it's certainly possible. Is a very special piece of land because it has been in agriculture for over 150 years. It's the longest continuous running farm in all of Orange County, which itself is a county named after agriculture, after all. And unfortunately, even much more so than in San Diego County, all of that open space has been lost to pretty much commercial and residential real estate. That's like Orange County's chief primary export is real estate. And we've really lost all of that. Fortunately for us, this house and organization has an interesting story in that it's the oldest wooden structure in the city of San Juan Capistrano, which in and of itself is a pretty old town, built by a Pony Express rider as they were building the train tracks through town, sold a few generations into a Japanese family, the Kinoshitas, who owned and operated the farm for a few generations. And then ultimately what happened is what's happened with essentially all farmland in what's now suburban Southern California, but really our suburban geographies throughout the United States, which is that at some point, a grandchild or a nephew or niece or a family member was gifted their family farm and had a tough choice to make. Which is especially coming out of the 80s and 90s where we didn't really have a strong value for food and certainly for local agriculture. And that choice was, do I keep working hard and not make very much money, or do I sell this land for X million dollars? And, obviously and unfortunately, a lot of people went in that latter direction, which has led to the loss of a lot of these spaces. Fortunately for us, at that point in the early 90s, the city of San Juan Capistrano bought this land in order to protect agriculture and open space. So through a bond measure, the city bought the land. Throughout the 90s, they leased 28 acres of it to an organic farmer doing commercial wholesale agriculture. And then they kept this last acre of what you're looking at on the screen, which is essentially the water tower on the left to the house and about 300 feet to the right of the house, this was 3/4 acres. They kept that as a dirt lot. And they said, maybe one day we will build a museum or a visitor center. And being a small town and being local government, they just never really got their act together and never built that visitor center. We came across this property in 2008 and had this vision and aspiration to build an ecology center. And very, as sometimes you do, and when you're young and ambitious, we very foolishly went to the mayor at the time and said, hey, can we build something here? And being a small town that it was, and fortuitously for us, he said, yeah, go for it. So we leased the land, and the first and many year effort of the organization was just about permaculture values, ecological design practices as a model and demonstration for our bioregion. So within, I would say, under 3 years, the property went from looking like it does on screen now to looking like this. For us, that was really about as far as we had thought about how far we wanted to take this, which is how do we create health through our shared ecosystem? And for many of us, that could mean our home or our workplace or our schools or our public spaces. So for those few years, we just rolled up our sleeves and we did the work. We hosted volunteer activations, we did film screenings, we did workshops, we did certification courses. We come from a background of permaculture design certification. We did farm dinners, and ultimately the space really kind of dictated the level of programming and opportunity in front of it, which is that schools and community members started to reach out and ask, can we host our field trip here? And we said, that sounds like a good idea. So we built an education department and so on. Really the infrastructure and the operation followed the enthusiasm from the community. You know, fortunately for us, I don't know how much you all know about Orange County. It's a little bit different than San Diego County. It is, the nicest way I can put it, it is not the most progressive hub of ecological values and movements. It's not Portland, it's not Madison, Wisconsin, it's not Santa Cruz. But we early on were able to create a narrative and an expression that was really agnostic to any sort of political or even social affiliation, which was just, and we very intentionally didn't even use any of that language. We don't use the word permaculture at all. You know, we talk about healthy spaces, and for us, that's actually been a really nice unifying force for this geography, where people come and visit us, and there's all sorts of different participation from folks that I would say span a political, economic, or social spectrum, but appreciate having health and beauty in their community. So this was a few years into the organization. This is kind of the back view of the house. Again, this was a dirt lot when we took over, and we created educational spaces and activities. And, you know, we like to call it a bit of surprise and delight as you turn around a corner, and we used educational signage and installations to tell the story. From the very early beginning, we believed in not just being this ecology center with a focus on sustainability or healthy food systems, but also being a cultural center. So we tie in a lot of the art and experiential vernacular and spaces throughout the physical installation. We just, I mean, I would say as a function of resourcefulness, have learned how to upcycle and repurpose things like shipping containers into education kitchens. But it just goes to say that engagement and education has been a central focus of this work for near 16 years now. How can we teach kids how to make healthy meals? How can we reintroduce some of these practices that have been lost through the last few years of canning, preserving, and various other elements? we pretty early on knew that we couldn't reach everyone on 3/4 of an acre in South Orange County. So we purchased this 1989 British double-decker bus and retrofitted it into a mobile version of the Ecology Center with a kitchen downstairs and a greenhouse upstairs. And we took it to schools for a few years, teaching kids about where their food comes from and doing hands-on activities like worm bin building or tomato plant up potting and fun things that they can get their hands into. So the hope was always taking kids out of the classroom. I mean, I was on a panel, this must have been 15 years ago, with Jim Moriarty, the former CEO of Surfrider International. And we were talking to these college students at UCSD, and it was a great panel and well organized. But you know, he said, guys, talking about the environment indoors is a waste of time. We're missing the mark here. You know, we got to get our hands dirty. We have to actually be in the spaces that we want to cherish and protect. So getting the kids out of the classroom was always the primary focus of that program. In 2018, end of 2018, we had the opportunity to take over the surrounding 28 acres. So that commercial wholesale organic farm went out of business. It looked nothing like this. It was, as I mentioned, a monoculture operation. They were growing strawberries in the spring, cucumbers in the summer, and brassicas in the fall and winter. They, in the 90s and early 2000s, were able to survive as a wholesale organic grower by distributing to the mothers markets and even the Whole Foods sometimes. But coming into the new challenge, as I've talked about, organic and regenerative organic, and the benefit, but also the challenge of some of these certifications is, as we have grown organic as a movement, and we have grown organic from a accessibility standpoint in terms of ingredients, we've also now created a great deal of competition for the small local family farmer. And there's no way that a 20-acre organic strawberry grower in 2018 is ever going to be able to compete with the pricing of Central America. You know, Costco, at the end of the day, they don't care where their organic strawberries come from. They have a buyer that's telling them, hey, our customer's asking for more organic, so let's put more organic on the shelves. And these massive operations in Central America have the best price and the best shipping and availability, and that's what we're going to go with. So the farm went out of business in 2018, and we were approached from the city, who asked us if we wanted to take over the land, and we pretended like we had never thought of it and said, that sounds interesting. And we did eventually. So now we operate both that original kind of front acre and then the surrounding 28. And the very first thing that we did was, as you can see here, start to create a little bit of definition. Whereas instead of there being 28 acres of monoculture, there's 15 or 17 1-acre fields that are now, and this is in year one when we took over. I think this one is a better vision that we took last year. Now there's 15 or so 1-acre farm fields that are separated by tree cover. So we planted around 2,000 or so fruit trees that you can kind of see here in the middle. Those are citrus. Over to the right middle, stone fruit. The bottom right, you're looking at some of the Mediterranean crops like fig, olive, mulberry, pomegranate. And what our field now represents is again, biodiversity. So we're able to more effectively rotate our crop and diversify our yield as an operation. So you can see, I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but we have the original house and the 1-acre that you can see is deeply, you think about the word agroforestry, so forested, and we now have 50-foot tall California sycamores and 30-foot tall elderberries and Catalina cherries and citrus and fig. And then that was kind of that zone that you saw in the images that we showcased was, the transformation of a dirt lot into a really ecological oasis, a thriving ecosystem. And then you're starting to see the rest of the farm field begin to take some of that shape as well. we talk about the animals. So the chickens are a critical element of that rotation. So they're in these, you can't tell on this photo, but that little coop in the back right-hand corner is on wheels, and our fencing is all on T-posts. So we're able to move them. So every month or so, the chickens are going to move over a little bit. And the hope is that throughout the year, they're covering the whole farm. Realistically, that's challenging with about 150 chickens at a time. You don't have the time to move them every single day. So the hope is that over the next year or so, we have a few different flocks of chickens, and they're all circumnavigating the farm as part of a little patchwork. I mentioned education. So we start at age 0 and go to age 100, I would say, but these are some of our students. So we have a farm apprenticeship program. For us, really, if I were to boil down, despite the fact that the mission is broad in its scope and it is holistic in its approach to sustainability for this planet, we are a farm. So, food is the lever that we pull in order to tell this story and push this movement forward. So we talk about more farmers, more farms, more food. That's really the goal. We have a lot of farmland in this country and on this planet, and it just happens to be that the vast majority of it, again, talking about industrialized agriculture, the vast majority of it is growing inedible food. We grow corn to produce ethanol to fuel our cars. We grow soy in order to feed cows. So we actually don't have a lot of literacy, especially in this suburban geography, of people that can actually farm if we were to give them land. So we have a farm apprenticeship program where we teach young people how to grow food and replicate the systems that we have at the Ecology Center. We have a farm stand where all of these ingredients go direct to our consumer. We're strong believers that relationship to our farmers and our farms is the critical step. A lot of you, I'm sure, are going to farmers markets and your person that grows the tomatoes that you love or the peaches that you really enjoy. So going straight to our community instead of racing to the bottom on wholesale is a critical step forward. I'm kind of zooming through here because I feel like I'm going way too long. Farm stand, again, a little bit of the pantry and the provisions. We make products, so we try to espouse the values of there being no waste on the farm. So if you have too many strawberries, that can either be a problem or it can be a solution. Food is obviously one of the ways in which people get excited about this work. We have, especially in Southern California, this foodie culture. I would say that we don't have the Northern California Chez Panisse foodie culture of people not just wanting great food from great restaurants and great chefs, but up there's also the connection to the source. So the seasonality and the farmer. I don't think we have that in Southern California, but I think we're getting close to there. So turning on food events that retell that story is one of the most effective ways in which we can do so. So from dinners on the farm, if it rains, very rarely we can go indoors in one of our hoop houses. And then we built a cafe most recently, which is the counterbalance. The dinner is like a 3-hour live fire, probably not great for kids, high price point experience. The cafe as the counterbalance as 5-day-a-week breakfast and lunch, drop in, I say this, apologies in advance, not a ton of humility here, but we have the best sourced restaurant in California. And I say that as really kind of a point of shame, which is that there is no other restaurant in our geography that knows where their food comes from, every single ingredient. And ours comes from, fortunately, 50 feet away. So you can come and have a fairly priced meal grown by people making fair wages with methodologies that align to your values. And it's something that you can do a few days a week without breaking the bank. Just trying to make you guys hungry. I know it's dinner time here. And then really at the end of the day, it's the children are at the heart of all the work that we do. We are sometimes set in our ways and sometimes stubborn. And, as cliche as it sounds, the children are the literal future. So for us, activities and education that align to children's programming and experiences that really educate and engage them is our primary focus. Can't start too young. So we have a school on site. We have a school that has its own like actual full-time school programming. We have after-school program as well as field trips and summer camps. I like to say we're like the worst business people in the world because we started a school, a restaurant, and a nonprofit. And there's probably no three worst businesses that anyone could think to start. But here we are, and then we get to do the fun stuff like building, wellness activities in and cultural activations like music festivals and art shows. This is 15-year retrospective of our history. This is in the farmhouse. We did a little just last year reminder of some of the things that we've brought to life. So these are all the posters of events, programs, campaigns, activations that we had designed and built. And I like to show this one because obviously you can see it's colorful tapestry. And that to us, again, speaks to bringing vibrancy to the conversation and making it beautiful and interesting. And instead of just, I feel like so much of the environmental movement is pretty scary. And we know if anyone's read Johnathan Safran Foer's We Are the Weather, he postures that apathy is like the single greatest enemy of change and impact. And there's nothing that creates more apathy than making people feel like there's no hope. So for us, the opportunity to turn this on and make it beautiful and dynamic and interesting was a critical piece. Film nights, we do them the last Wednesday of the month throughout the summer. So June, July, August, September. Come on out. We'd love to have you. No better place to watch an environmental film than outdoors. And this is our team at the Ecology Center. We're now, as I said, almost 16 years in, about 90 staff and a couple hundred, if not 1,000 volunteers. Just trying very humbly our very best to do this work for this community. So hopefully I touched on not just a little bit about us, but this work as a whole. We are happy to host anyone here and anyone that you know through a visit. As I mentioned, you actually can come from San Diego to Orange County. We're open 7 days a week. We have a farm stand and all this programming. It's all on our website. We have a membership program and passionate supporters. And most importantly, I always like to say the opportunity to participate is just becoming that change yourself. This is my long email address. I'm here as a resource. I know we're going to stick around and ask some questions, but if anyone just wants to learn more about this organization or this work, please reach out. I'll be the first to say, and Meryl experienced this firsthand, I'm not great at email. The joys and pleasure of being outside is that it's a little bit disconnected from technology, but I'll do my very best to answer anything. And I certainly don't fault anyone for reaching out twice because I didn't respond the first time. So that's my time. Joe, I know you have a few questions, and Chris, you've been keeping track of the ones coming from the chat here.
Yes, thank you, Johnathan. Boy, this is absolutely inspiring. The most obvious question to me just leaps out from your presentation is, if we cookie cutted what you're doing, how much land area would we need to have enough food to feed the population of, pick it, the state, the county, the country, the world?
So 2 answers here. First is the obvious one. I don't know. From a mathematical or scientific level, I couldn't tell you the exact amount of farms and farmland that it would take. The other answer I'll give you is that it's going to take both small urban community farms and also larger scale production operations in partnership. So you need both. You call it the hub and spoke model. You have a space that people can go and access and have a relationship to, and then you have these larger production center drivers for food. I would argue that we have enough farmland today to feed all of humanity, no problem. We don't have a food shortage. We have a nutritional shortage. We have a challenge, which is, as I mentioned, the vast majority of the farmland in this country is growing food that's not going to be eaten by people. So that's step one, which is, to me, I actually, I don't know how you guys took it. It's hard on Zoom. I barely ever do this, but hopefully there's not a lot of doom and gloom in this chat room. Hopefully there's a lot of optimism and enthusiasm, which is that all we need to do is take a look backwards of where we've come from to create a roadmap of where we need to go, which is that every community was centered in and around agriculture. Towns, villages, cities all had relationship to agriculture for all of human history. And of course we have more people now, but we also have more resources now. So first thing I would say is that the steps towards shifting access and availability are going to include training more farmers, especially in this bioregion. Nobody grew up on a farm when we're not inheriting farmland, so we have to start from scratch. And then repurposing open space, be it golf courses. In our case, we've created, again, without much humility, such a beautiful and well represented space that we get, I would say, a dozen calls a year from Chris. Before this call mentioned Fox Point Farms in Encinitas, from housing developers, from school districts, and from municipalities that have this open space that they want to bring to life through health and nutrition and community engagement. We're coming to a time and place in which city administrators rather see spaces like the Ecology Center than golf courses. So the short answer is, this is a bottom up and top down approach, how we're going to feed 9 billion, almost 10 billion people. On the community scale, I think it's really just one about repurposing some of our open spaces, and then hopefully, and this is the harder one, transitioning conventional agriculture. And some of that's going to have to come with behavior change, which is that, people are going to keep growing alfalfa until it's no longer viable to feed people beef 3 times a day, 7 days a week. So there's a bit of consumer behavior and some social change that needs to happen. But the enthusiasm that I gain is that young people that are inheriting farms, not just in suburban Southern California, but in Nebraska, are not that interested in inheriting the systems that created, in large parts, disease for their families. You're seeing farmers, not just physically, but it's, has one of the highest suicide rates in this country, and some of the most economic challenge within any profession in this country. So we're seeing this great movement. And if I could just recommend watching either Kiss the Ground or Common Ground, of people that are starting to realize that the path forward is through community agriculture.
Excuse me, Johnathan, would you mind, Johnathan, would you mind not sharing your screen anymore so we can all see each other? Thank you.
I don't know how to do that, but I'll figure it out as you ask. Go ahead.
No, you get you.
There we go.
That's perfect. Well, I mean, it's such a fantastic opportunity, and you can also add to everything you've said that the soil will capture a great deal of carbon and help mitigate the ills of the climate mess that we're in. So it's just one more benefit from the fantastic story that you're telling. Chris?
So we have a number of questions here, Johnathan. I'm going to start with one that you started to answer almost to a small extent, which is how to get more farming. So Merrill was asking, based on the fact that you're the beneficiaries of a very supportive community, right? San Juan Capistrano has the land there, it's ready to go, and they provided that to you. What else can we do aside from the developer interest, things like that you've already discussed, that could help lobby municipalities in northern San Diego County to create similar support for farms like yours?
Yeah, so a few different tracks to the same outcome. Certainly entrepreneurship and multi-generational land as farm opportunities that's one, and happy to talk about that. But I do believe firmly, and I didn't know this through experience, that you have these 3 public entities that have a great deal of interest in this work, and they're housing developers, school districts, and municipalities. And the good thing is they're already going in this direction. the opportunity, I think, isn't just, I mean, we talk about this all the time, is making a call or writing a letter or showing up to a council meeting, or is speaking up for the reappropriation of open space into agriculture. Talk about it. I mean, put housing developers aside, because that's a private entity and they're working in this direction anyway. I had this great conversation with this, wonderfully clueless person that worked for the largest developer in the country that told me, I don't care about farms, but they're much cheaper to build than golf courses or clubhouses. So can you help us build a farm? And I said, of course, I'm happy to. And I love that. So for them, there's a bit of market that will create the demand. I think that Fox Point and Encinitas is going to be a great example for that. These homes I think are all probably sold out. Their restaurant's going to do well. Their farmers market should be a great benefit for that community, and it's going to be healthy and beautiful. So it's a win-win-win. So the other two, from a city and school district standpoint, I think it's just as simple as, if it's writing a letter or showing up, or if you already have a relationship with a council member or a city manager, is saying, I mean, you're welcome to use us as an example. Hey, take a look at the Ecology Center and what they've done for San Juan Capistrano. They've hired 95 people. They have a $10 million operating budget. They are growing a lot of food that goes out their front door in their farm stand and cafe and pantry products. And by the way, it's, as Joe mentioned, sequestering carbon. And by the way, it's not toxic. And by the way, it's an education center as well. So you can stand on our backs and say, hey, here's a good model. And then on the school side, this is one that I get very excited about and also sometimes deflated by, which is that we hear often and time again, school districts don't have budget and they can't afford these sorts of things. And I just don't really resonate with. We built 2 different school farms, one in Encinitas down the street from Fox Point, across the street from the Botanic Garden and the Leachstag Foundation, the Farm Lab, which is operated by the Encinitas Union School District. We designed and built and programmed and operated. And then we did one more recently in Anaheim at Magnolia. And I was talking to the superintendent of Anaheim Union School District, and they're like, oh, we just don't have that much money. And I said, well, tell me, like, what's your operating budget? And he said, oh, we're a big school district, 13 high schools, 30,000 students, it's about a $500 million operating budget. And I said, well, okay, well, what do you guys spend on your sports programs at your 13 high schools? Well, combined between coaches. And so, it might be $25 million a year. And to me, and listen, I was a high school athlete and I support athletics and the arts. But if we can spend $25 million on high school sports at a high school district, we can spend $300,000 on a school farm. So to me, it's not a question, and sorry for being on the soapbox here, but it's not a question of the accessibility. It's a question of the priority. And when we decide that these spaces are more important than parking lots or the third softball field, then we can have them anywhere.
Okay, Jonathan, we've got, just for a timing perspective, we have 5 more questions. I think you should be able to get to them all, but kind of pace yourself around that. Quick question, and it's one that I can speak a little bit to, which is, are you able to use renewable energy on the farm? As an energy guy, what I'll tell you is you're going to use whatever the grid gives you, but you could generate renewable energy, I suppose. But quick answer to that.
Yeah. So we have a great deal of solar on. We have a large barn, and we got a grant that covered putting a great deal of solar on that. I mean, enough for our whole operation. So
okay,
solar
so generating renewable. Great.
Yep.
So you're generating renewables out there, man, and enough to cover all your use, you think?
Yep.
Okay, great. Another quick practical question. Carolyn asks, how do students apply for an internship on the farm?
So there's a few different pathways. There's informal, come and participate anytime. Email me. I put my email on there, and I'm sure we can circulate it through the group. And then the formal apprenticeship program, the application window is in December with selection through December and January, and they start in March. So that'll be on our website, and you just look up the Ecology Center Farm Apprenticeship.
Okay, thank you. And then a couple of water related questions. Michelle is bemoaning the increase in water prices, and she asks, is there anything she can do short of digging up her vegetable garden and fruit trees, given the the skyrocketing price of water. And there's a related question from Marion, which is, what do you think about hydroponic gardening? So I don't know if you want to combine those answers, but those are two questions.
Happily. And that's a long answer, but I would say that water is a part of agriculture, and certainly there are methodologies like drip irrigation, and there's crop varieties that we can select to that are going to help us in terms of our water usage. But I don't think or talk all that much about how do we eliminate water from agriculture, because that's not really possible. It's more, how do we appropriate water from wasteful? I hate to bash on golf courses all day. That was not my intention coming in here, but you know, we can, with certainly all of the irrigation on golf courses, we can, and in the lawns throughout our bioregion, we can water farms. Hydroponics are a solution, and they're a solution for the right application and the right geography. So, you know, urban environments without a lot of open space, hydroponic is a good solution. The problem with hydroponic, one, is it's energy intensive, much more so than our methodology of agriculture. So you're replacing one problem with another. And with the lack of soil-based agriculture, you're removing the opportunity to sequester carbon.
Okay. Joe, I don't have questions. I have one more from the chat line. You want me to finish with that one?
Yeah, go. I've got a bunch. You go.
Okay. So Donna asked, how much mulch and other nutrients are you adding to the soil per acre, per season, or per year?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. From a back of the napkin standpoint, I can tell you we do a lot of mulching. So we're always covering any of our unused field. So if it's not in production, it's not in cover crop, we're mulching. We also use a good deal of compost that we produce on site. So any of our food scrap becomes compost. And we also take, San Juan Capistrano has an equestrian community, so we take some manure from this geography. And as you know, I kind of talked about biodiversity, there's no one solution to healthy agriculture. It's a mixed methodology of systems. So you mulch, you compost tea, you use manure. It's kind of the right application for the right job. But I couldn't tell you exactly how much we use per acre and how often it's applied.
Okay, that's it from the chat line, Joe.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Johnathan, this is a multi-part question that starts with, in order to maximize food production, we need good soils, and soils cycle nutrients and carbon and filter water, and we need to build the soil structure and soil organic matter and so forth. The role of soil the microbiome plays also in climate regulation, as we mentioned a moment ago. But one of the things that I was delighted to learn is that many antibiotics and other drugs are derived from soil microorganisms. However, less than 5% of the medicinal products in soils have even been identified, at least from the research that I've seen. So should we fund more research, and who should do that?
Yeah, Joe warned me in advance that he was going to ask the hard-hitting scientific questions here. And I shared very humbly that I'm both not a scientist and not an expert. So our answers are really always going to be anecdotal, and they're going to be based off of what we see in the field. So it starts by saying, you know, healthy soil creates a healthy crop. So we know the importance of our soil ecosystem and protecting it and the benefits of it. In terms of the science moving forward in soil, I would say it's one of the most critical and under-researched elements of our environment. I think that connecting soil to food from a medical standpoint is some of the most important work we can do. There's an expert up in the Pacific Northwest named Elaine Ingham, who does some of the best soil work that I'm familiar with. So if Joe, you, or anyone else is very interested in that work, I would recommend looking at Elaine Ingham. And then there's a great book from a doctor at UC Berkeley called Farm Ecology. So like pharmacology, but with a F for farm and ecology. And she talks about this really unstudied link between human health and soil health. Anecdotally, we know that it makes sense, but nobody's actually done the work to tell us how can we link these two things, or done it at least enough times replicably so that we can start to lobby and petition for the importance and value of creating healthy soil as a function of creating not just a healthy planet, but healthy people.
Sounds like a
It
really
didn't answer your question, but
no.
it's
It points to this being a very valid and important set of research that we so far have not done enough with, and is a huge opportunity, it seems to me.
yep.
There has been some research about animals that have contact with live soil and dust, and their microbiomes have greater diversity and richness than animals that don't, that perhaps live on a cement floor in a zoo or whatever. So again, I don't think we know anything much about the impact of a more robust biome in humans. And is there a way that we can track our personal gut microbiome and work to expand its richness?
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, the human health oftentimes is the single greatest driver for systems adoption because we're selfish. So using that lever to bring people into this movement is a very effective one. And you're hopefully starting to see more and more information about gut microbiome health. And you're seeing it from both the Western medical world as well as some of the more holistic Eastern facing professionals. And it's becoming really, I would say that might be the area that's much more in fashion to invest in and study and participate in, from drinking kombucha to fermented products to the actual medical research itself. So again, not an expert necessarily in that, but I would say that all of the enthusiasm and the energy that I'm seeing in this space, really a vast majority of it comes from people thinking about human health. And a lot of times it's thinking about this gut microbiome and thinking about the plant, and at the microcellular level, the microfungi that exist within our soil in order to create the healthy food, in order to create the healthy gut biome.
Thank you. Synthetic fertilizer, which you mentioned, leaches nutrients from soils, sometimes contaminates groundwater, results in algal blooms, and even the production of harmful greenhouse gases and dead zones in our waterways, the oceans and rivers and lakes and so forth. It seems to me that there must be a powerful story that we could tell about improving management practices without losing, soil management practices without losing the benefits of that come from soil. How would I say, live soil as compared to the synthetic fertilizers? It's I guess my personal view is we need to reduce the use of synthetic potassium and so forth. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, 100%, absolutely. And I think we really need to rethink the whole basis of conventional agriculture, which is one that right now is built on commodity crops and not particularly focused on quality of any sense whatsoever. It's just about production. So when we're focused on push, you're going to need to introduce, in order to create that balance, the synthetics in order to get to the yield that you're required to get to. And we need to lobby, and we need to think and talk about these systems. I mean, one that people don't know about is there is a synthetic pesticide or an herbicide used in strawberry production called methyl bromide, which has been banned for 30 years. And every single year, we've just extended the use of it in conventional strawberry growing because industrial growers haven't been able to prove that they can grow strawberries conventionally without it. So it's just like styrofoam bans get extended because the restaurants say we can't do without it. We're doing the same thing in agriculture. And I think it's time for us, and by and large, we all are, by our shopping habits and our values, say that this is not good enough. It's poisoning our planet, it's poisoning our children, and it's poisoning our soil. And that's a lose operation. So again, soapbox here, Joe, and I know that you agree with me. I would say it's all worth exploring how we make this shift towards healthy soil.
Yeah. I mean, it obviously makes sense to do that. You know, our industrial farming techniques are reducing nutrients and, you know, the health promoting potential from soils and from our from agriculture in general. As the micronutrient density in products decreases in the food we're eating, is it adequate to use supplements, you know, multivitamins and so forth to fill in the gaps, or should we just go all out for more healthy food?
Yeah, I would not recommend anyone take my medical advice, but I've been vegan for 17 years, so I know that vitamin B is something that might be lacking in my diet, and I take it. I do believe that we can, uh, as Dr. Mark Hyman says in Common Ground, is food is literal medicine. It's not like medicine. We can heal ourselves through our food, but I'm also a cancer survivor that went through chemotherapy and had to use invasive and really toxic methodologies in order to heal my body. So I personally believe that there's a place for both, but certainly lean towards the how can we use healthy methodologies to heal the body first and preventatively, hopefully.
Moving beyond just the agriculture, but once we've harvested cereal grains, we tend to remove bran and germ tissues and so forth that have many health beneficial phytochemicals, et cetera, and fiber and minerals and vitamins. What can we do to reduce the low consumer acceptance of less processed food? Say it like
I
that.
mean, these are cultural issues. In other countries, we see this, you know, more indigenous or holistic, not just adoption, but really it never went away. Relationship to food. You think of the little grandma in Oaxaca, or you know, family member in Europe who still walks to a market and has direct relationship to the person growing the mushroom or the fish or baking the bread that they invest in. And I like that conversation because oftentimes people talk about organic or regenerative organic as inaccessible. And to me, it has nothing to do about accessibility. It has to do with prioritization. Of course, there are food insecure families who don't have a dollar in their pocket. But when we talk about the majority of us, it's, you know, we've shifted our values of what we invest in every single day. So where, you know, it used to be that for really all of human history, food and nourishment was the greatest investment that people made. We pay less in relation to our individual income or wealth for food today than any time in human history. And I know that we feel it when we go to the grocery store and things are seemingly more expensive, but they are tremendously devalued. So we're not actually paying the cost before the externalizations or the subsidies or otherwise. Joe, I know this isn't what you asked, but I do think we link the conversation of how we value our food with what we're actually eating. And once we actually have context and relationship to that food, and we know and understand the person that produced it, we will understand and adopt it much more effectively. And I think that having that local relationship is where we're going to cut out a lot of that internationally shipped, processed food that hasn't really been serving us.
Yes. I assume you would agree that we should not have PFAS and those families of chemicals and other contaminants in our food. But as the reading I've done around this suggests that PFAS, as an example, is much more integrated into our food chain and our water systems in, say, Virginia, where a lot of it was produced, or West Virginia and so forth, and not so much in, say, San Diego County, which says, in a sense, that there would be value in having a map, you know, a geographic distribution of the various contaminants that might help us in terms of selecting, what to remediate where and where to grow with less danger or, less harmful chemicals. Do you know of any approach to getting, this is a little techie question, I suppose, but of building that map about the distribution of these harmful chemicals?
Yeah, not specifically. I do say with just a little bit of, sorrow that we have found forever chemicals in undocumented tribes people in the Amazon and
Wow.
in our rain. So there's an element of industrialization that I think we've come too far on. The Pandora's box has been open to a certain extent, and I actually don't spend too much time thinking about perfection in that sense, which is how do we avoid or eliminate all of these things completely. I mean, even us, we're trying to farm as best as we possibly can, regenerative organic certification, and then even going beyond that. And there are cars in our parking lot and roads around us that are certainly toxic in various ways in which we both understand and don't understand. So the different answer to your question, Joe, is that I think for me, at least, it's about doing the very best that we can, not about what does perfection look like here. Should we avoid PFAS and forever chemical? 100%. And in the ways in which we know that we can through personal behavior and ultimately through legislation, we absolutely should be, is the short answer.
Fantastic. Thank you. There is, I mentioned this in our discussion after the film showing, this wonderful quote that says, raising soil's organic matter just 1.5% on all row-cropped fields in the world would remove all the carbon added to the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution and bring us back to 290 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere. Marin County has a project, there's a group called Marin Carbon Project, just trying to get all of the agriculture in Marin County to use, how would you say, carbon farming techniques, not necessarily what you were talking about exactly, but techniques to reduce or to sequester more carbon in the soil. How would we get a Marin Carbon Project twin or whatever, or should we try to in Orange County and San Diego County?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is absolutely. And that's through grassroots efforts, both from an organizational standpoint, a group of people raising their hand and taking the charge to build infrastructure and support for something, as well as on the personal level, which is, I think, one of the most exciting things about this work is that we can all make a difference and we can do it starting today. So whereas going to your farmer's market and growing your own and coming to the Ecology Center is not necessarily going to solve all of the problems here, and we may not be the absolute experts in carbon farming, you're at the very least know that you're supporting soil-based farming, which is sequestering carbon at a meaningful level. So I think, I mean, the answer is yes. And as with everything, it's complex. And as with everything, there's a bottom-up and top-down approach from the local systems change conversation to the policy level element that we should all keep an eye on.
So there's a role for all of us to play here, isn't there?
Every day.
In whichever way or ways we want to play.
That's right.
The last theme that I'd like to introduce is a total left turn. I'd like to get your thoughts about it. At the beginning of our session this evening, Meryl showed a video with some of our prior speakers. And one of them was Dr. Adam Dorr, who is the executive in an organization called Rethink X. And they have worked with, his presentation was about solar and batteries and clean energy and the like. But Adam and the other leader of that organization, Tony Seba, have been writing about and talking about a disruption, a complete disruption in food and agriculture. And they talk about precision fermentation. You think of the Beyond Beef products and the like.
Yeah.
And taking that precision fermentation technology and making it available so that within a very short time, this is more focused on the meat side of our food system than the non-meat, if you will, but we could produce more proteins far cheaper with great deal more variety. They actually talk about an amazing concept that they call food as software. You build a recipe, if you will, with the fermentation starting with Beyond Beef, and you feed you make available open source the formula for Beyond Beef, and you let chefs everywhere in the world create with precision fermentation new products, new food types, right? That would be done at far lower cost than our existing food, would make available vast quantities of land, removing the need for most beef cows and all of the infrastructure that goes with that. Tony and Adam say, quote, by 2030, cattle farming industry will be bankrupt. I mean, it's a pretty wild concept, and the food disruption will free up 80% of land that's currently used for agriculture, animal agriculture in the world. And this all will lead to food as software and an explosion of new food types and new culinary experiences, and would be utterly transformational to our planet, not only to our food system, but to the land uses and so forth. I read their stuff and I get interested, and yet I find myself saying, I don't know if I want to do that. Right? It's a big shift from where we are now.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that? I know I'd probably dump that on you without discussing it, but
Well, I mean, given that I understood 3 or 4 of the words you just said in the past 3 minutes, how valuable my opinion is, I do believe in permaculture, there's a tenet called appropriate technology. And appropriate technology, oftentimes, as much as it sounds like a technological term, can be as simple as orientation or as complicated as PV. So I think that there is a time and place for innovation and food science in this work. I think that there's similarly a great deal of grassroots and community-based effort based off of the things that we already know, as I've mentioned a few times, thousands of years old practices in agriculture that have worked for humans for tens of thousands of years. And I think that both of those two things can exist at the same time. I mean, I don't particularly want to eat lab-grown meat or Soylent Green or any other of those things. I also don't really want to eat the processed plant-based versions of those things. I also don't really believe fully in, and I know that this was in the film that we saw, that we can save the world through large animal rotation. We simply can't do that if we're going to eat the amount of animal protein that we do today. So this Allen Savory Institute school of thought that simply by introducing more cows and more ruminants into the food system, we're going to solve all these problems, I also don't find to be correct. I think that it's really about finding the appropriate and culturally relevant solution for a bioregion. So the grasslands in Montana, I think, have a lot of opportunity for bison and beef to roam on, whereas Southern California doesn't. This is arid desert. we're not grasslands here. So the short answer to your question, Joe, is that I think it's worth exploring appropriate technologies that fit the particular challenges of a specific population versus large scale global solutions that are going to create their own industrial set of challenges.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Chris, did I see some additional questions coming in?
I did not.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, we added a couple of links to the YouTube channel, and also to a link to the Ecology Center, and also to the book that you mentioned, Johnathan. What was it called? We Are the Weather.
Yeah,
So I added those links. So that's what you saw coming in. They
Oh,
weren't
thank you.
questions.
Thank you.
But
Mary,
anyway, I think
over
we're
to you.
about ready to wrap up here. And so Johnathan, we have a tradition, as you know, because you were a member of our panel, of giving our people a tree certificate. And did you get your tree certificate?
I did. It's hanging up on my office.
Okay, fantastic. Well, we didn't think you'd want another tree. So what we're going to do for you instead is we're going to make a donation to the Ecology Center, and as thanks to you for taking your time to explain everything that you do and give us all this wonderful information. I know I learned a lot, and I plan on making a field trip there with my 2 granddaughters. So I'm looking forward to it.
I'd be happy to show you around.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to it. And Chris, I want to thank you so much for jumping in here at the last minute and helping us out. And as always, thank you to everybody else, all of our other audience members, and your great questions. And with that, I'm going to say good night to all of you. Good night.
Good night,
Thank you very
everybody.
much.
All right.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you all, and thank you, Johnathan.